Clinton's loss in 2016 shook the Democratic Party. The Democrats' seasoned, moderate candidate was unable to beat a celebrity businessman with no government experience.
You're all fired. All four are fired.
That left some Bernie Sanders supporters wondering if things could have been different with the more progressive candidate on the ballot instead. And now, 4 years later, Sanders has emerged as the current frontrunner in the Democratic primary. So, would a move to the left help or hurt the Democrats in their quest for the White House? Well, we can actually look to history for a little insight on this one. Those of you who were around in the 70s might know what I'm talking about. You see, Democrats have been in a similar spot before. So what happened then? And how does it apply right now? Senator George McGovern, a proud liberal from South Dakota, announced his presidential campaign on January 18, 1971.
I have decided to seek the presidency of the United States.
17 months later, he secured the Democratic nomination with Thomas Eagleton as his vice president.
And I nominate Senator George McGovern for the presidency of the United States.
His campaign and the political conditions of the time have some striking similarities to what we're seeing today. In 1968, moderate Democrat Hubert Humphrey lost to Republican Richard Nixon. It was a time of political upheaval, and Nixon's popularity was poor outside the Republican Party, much like President Trump's has been.
You hear them. You hear them night after night on your television. People shouting their obscenities about America and what we stand for.
That the Democrats are crooked. They've got a lot of crooked things going.
Humphrey admitted that he couldn't win over young anti-war voters. And his loss in 1968, like Clinton's in 2016, laid the groundwork for candidates with more liberal views in the next election. In 1972, that candidate was George McGovern. Today, it's Bernie Sanders, and there are parallels in their policies. McGovern launched his campaign vowing to withdraw every American soldier from Southeast Asia if he became president.
Any senator who talks about sending American forces into Cambodia ought to lead the charge himself. I'm fed up to the ears with old men dreaming up wars for young men to die in.
And here's Sanders in 2020.
These wars have cost us so much in blood and in treasure.
Both McGovern and Sanders had high-profile endorsements from minorities, especially the black community.
I believe that Senator McGovern will bring an end to the era of division in our nation and will usher in a new era of reconciliation.
I can honestly say that your integrity propels and compels me to keep supporting you.
And McGovern even made legalization of marijuana part of his platform.
In politics, Senator George McGovern said in Boston today that the prohibition of alcohol, tried in the 1920s, was a failure, and that perhaps the sensible thing to do sometime in the future about marijuana is not to prohibit its use, but to control it, the way we control alcoholic beverages.
And so has Sanders.
But one thing you can do with an executive order, and I will do it on my first day in the White House, is make marijuana legal in every state.
The backdrop of rising income inequality played a central role for both campaigns. In the 70s, a rising percentage of Americans felt that the rich were getting richer and poor getting poorer.
But an election year is the people's year to speak. And this year the people are going to ensure that the tax system is changed so that work is rewarded and so that those who derive the highest benefits will pay their fair share rather than slipping through the loopholes at the expense of the rest of us.
It is the reality that the people on top, with their wealth and power and access to lawyers and accountants and lobbyists, are able to manipulate the system to their own benefits. That's what the rigged economy is all about.
But despite the momentum that led McGovern to the nomination, he was annihilated in the 1972 general election against Richard Nixon. Now, does that mean Sanders doesn't stand a chance against President Trump? Not necessarily, because there are also major differences today. For one, the media landscape is far more chaotic than in McGovern's times, when there were only a handful of news sources and they were widely trusted. Compare that to today, where social media and a 24/7 news cycle has created echo chambers, filter bubbles, and a divided audience. There's also the changing electorate. During McGovern's times, voters of color and the LGBTQ community were on the fringes of the Democratic Party's target demographics, whereas today, they're at the core of the Democratic voter base. And of course, there are all the elections between now and then. Moderate Democratic candidates have lost in half a dozen election years since then: 1980, 1984, 1988, 2000, 2004, and 2016. And if you follow the numbers, recent polling shows Sanders beating Trump in a head-to-head. In fact, he's right there with his moderate Democratic rivals. So history can always help ground us in some context, but today's election has its own unique set of conditions. And of course, there's still a long way to go till November.